go with me in the book of Samuel, Samuel number 26, verse number 7. This is a message that I have titled, Sparing the Enemy That You Ought to Have Killed. And many a times in life, we've got so much dangerous people around us. We've got so much dangerous enemies. And most of the time, we have prayed prayers that God kill every enemy that comes after me, that God destroy the enemy back to sender or whatever. But I want to tell you, God may kill your enemies, but it is not all of your enemies that ought to die. Now the problem about human beings is that anything that is smelling that they are enemies, they want it dead. But in the Bible, when we look at God, we begin to see a God who doesn't kill any type of an enemy, but there is a certain kind. So among the people which you call them your enemies or spirit or whatever, you have to understand that there are people that you ought not to kill, and killing them will be destruction to your own destiny. But I want you to read with me right now in the book of Samuel 26, verse number 7. The Bible says, So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. But Abner and the people lay around him about him. Then said Abishai to David, God had delivered thy enemy into thy hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once. I will not smite him the second time. And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said furthermore, And the Lord liveth, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him on his day. He shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is in his bolster, and cruse water, and let us go. So when David took the spear and the cruse of water from Saul's bolster, and they get them away, and no man saw it, nor knew it, neither awaked, for they were all asleep, and because of a deep sleep from the Lord that had fell upon them. Because of a deep sleep that the Lord had made them to fall upon. Now the Bible here tells us about David. I think all of you are familiar with the story of David having to fight a king at the time which was called Saul, a backslidden king. Because David was anointed, and as anointed as a king of Israel, even though that he was not a king, but his battle of kingship started before he even occupied the throne. So the king of the time, which was Saul, had jealous upon David towards him, and he actually fought him. Now the Bible says, when he was pursuing David, he pursued David until David ran to the forest. So David's life was in danger, because Saul was not pursuing David to arrest him, but he was pursuing David to kill him. So he pursued him, he went after him. But the Bible says one day, while Saul is pursuing David, he reached a place where he slept with his army near a mountain where David was and his men. Now the Bible says David said to his men, who shall accompany me to go to my enemy's camp? It means to the camp of Saul. Then it happened that Abishai, who is the same man who struck a man that tried to kill David, who was an armor bearer and a protector and a warrior aside of David, said to David that I shall go with you to the camp of our enemy. Then David went with him, and they found Saul sleeping and his spear aside on the ground, and they were sleeping, and all the men, they were in deep sleep. And this was the best time in David's life to free himself from the persecution of the enemy, to free himself from the hatred and from even the hunting that Saul was doing in his life. He has been hunting his life, he has been doing great things. So this was the greatest time that each and every person would have used to destroy their enemy. Now the Bible says when Abishai saw that Saul was actually sleeping on the ground, then Abishai said to David, for God today has given your enemies into thy hand. Allow me to strike him only once, and I will not have to strike him the second time. I will strike him once, and it will be done with him. Then David said to Abishai, I know that you've been fighting for me. I've known that you've been doing great things. But this time around, touch him not. Don't strike him. Leave him. Then the Bible says what David did, he cut the hem of the garment of Saul, and he cut the tip of the cloth, and took the cruse water and the spear of Saul with him. Then when he did that, he left the camp, and they all didn't wake up because they were in deep slumber from the Lord. And one day, the following morning, when Saul woke up, David stood on the mountain. And when David stood on the mountain, he told Saul that God had given you on my hand. But as God gave you on my hand because I was there and you were all asleep with your men, then David began to rebuke the men that were around Saul and said, how can you be asleep and allow your king to sleep as well, and you see not when the enemy comes in your midst? Were you not in charge of protecting your king? Then the Bible says, when Saul looked at trying to find out what David is talking about, then David said, King, check your clothes right now and look at the back of your clothes and see if it's full, because I have cut, this is one of the pieces of your cloth, I have cut it to show that I was there and the Lord had gave you in my hand, but I refused to kill you. Then when Saul heard that, he was pierced in the heart and said, David, I know you are a righteous man, but today I don't want to go very far with this. I want to go to the title of our message, of which I say, sparing the enemy that you ought to have killed. David understood in life that even though he was a warrior, even though he was a man of battle, not every enemy deserved to die. There were some enemies that you didn't need to lay your hand upon. Now what is happening is that the man of David, which is Abishai, he tells David that the Lord has given your enemy in your hand. I want to tell you this, God is going to give every enemy of your life in your hand. But it is up to you to check who deserves the punishment of the Lord or who deserves it not. But if you are bitter, if you are angry and you late judgment, you will kill even the enemy that you didn't supposed to kill. Now David was a man after God's heart and a man that loves God very much. So in him, he had the character of the Most High God. That's why the Bible says, when God chose David, he said, for I have found the man that is after my own heart as the Lord. It means when we look at David, we are looking at a man that had a heart that is after the Lord. He seeks to understand God and he seeks to know God. That's why we find him in the book of Psalms number 51 saying, create in me, O God, a clean heart and restore to me your spirit. So David wanted a heart like God. Now we all know that God is merciful, God is full of love, and God is full of grace. When God gives your enemies in your hand, you have to understand that it is not all of your enemies that ought to die. So this is coming to what I want to tell you about. Don't kill every enemy that comes your way. There are enemies that are brought by God to your table. Remember David said, for thou God prepare me a table in the presence of my enemies, anointed my head with oil and my cup runneth over. Meaning that not every enemy that comes in your life deserves to die. There are some blessings that can never manifest until enemies are present. David does not say, you prepare me a table in the absence of my enemies, but he says, thou God prepare me a table in the presence of my enemies. There are enemies that are supposed to be present when God is doing great things in your life. And when you mistakenly kill those enemies, you have aborted your destiny before time. That's why the Bible says we must have long suffering. We must be slow in anger, abounding in mercy, and abounding in love. Blessed is those that are kind, for they shall be shown the kindness. Blessed those that are merciful, but they shall be shown mercy. When you show mercy to your enemy, you show the heart of God. There are people that are fighting you. There are people that are after your life. There are people that don't want to see anything good in your life. But if you can show them that I had advantage over you, but I chose to spare you, sparing the enemy that you ought to have killed. The greatest way of demonstrating the mercy and the love and the character of Christ is when you spare an enemy that you had an advantage on. When you spare an enemy that you had an advantage over, it shows that you are having strength like God. God will make your enemies bow down and be weak in your presence. But your mistake will be to kill the enemy that you ought to have spared. Look at the life of Joseph. The Bible says Joseph, his brothers, sold him to the Egyptians, tried to kill him, hated him, didn't want to see him. He felt pain. He felt everything bad happening in his life. But one day when his brothers came and they were vulnerable before him, because he was the prime minister of Egypt, instead of killing his brothers to pay back revenge, he said, what you, my brothers, planned for evil, God made it work together for good, so that you may see the salvation of many. There are enemies which bring evil in your life that is constructive to create a change that will bring you towards the fulfillment of your destiny. There is a kind of enemies that are saying bad things, talking bad things about you, but all along it is for the glory of the Lord. Spare the enemy that you ought to have killed. God bless you. I love you.